Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to continue our discussion with mental illnesses in fiction by sticking with the sort of anxiety disorders, the various anxiety disorders. The last time we talked about sort of generalized anxiety, and today I want to talk more about a particular kind, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD as it's called. It is probably the most misrepresented mental illness in fiction. I'm sure there's probably another one out there, but the one that really jumps out to me is OCD. To the point that's pretty much like a meme that most people assume it means this thing over here, and it means something very different. A lot of people say, like, "Oh, my OCD can't let me leave the dishes in the sink overnight." Well, that might be OCD, but more than likely just you're kind of a neat freak, and that's okay. But it's not necessarily OCD. OCD stands for obsessive compulsive disorder. So there's two pieces to that, the obsessive and then the compulsive. The obsessive relates to thoughts, obsessive thoughts, intrusive thoughts. These are thoughts people don't want in their head, they don't want to think about. And then compulsions is the behaviors, things that they're doing that they don't really want to do, but they feel like they need to do. They're compelled to do these things. So let's talk about the first part, the obsessive part. The obsessive thoughts, or kind of intrusive thoughts, as some people describe them. These are thoughts that jump into people's heads. They usually have little to no context to them. This is not like related to what's going on around them, and then and it's very distressing. That's probably the most important part of all this. Is OCD is very distressing. That's part of why it's called an anxiety disorder, because the anxiety is that if the compulsions aren't done, or if the obsessions are, the intrusive thoughts aren't dealt with, then something bad will happen. And again, that's sort of the piece of anxiety disorders, is something bad will happen unless if, that sort of thing. The obsessive thoughts can come from a wide range of things. One I've noticed that's very common is people have an intense fear of losing like bodily control. People become intensely afraid they're going to spontaneously throw up, defecate, urinate, orgasm, ejaculate. These are kind of common ones where people are, and they have this thought running in their head that they're afraid they're just going to like vomit uncontrollably. And again, this is different than like sort of a normal anxiety response. Like if most people are very afraid of public speaking. So if you told them that they had to give a presentation at work to, a dozen people, they'd be go, "Oh my God, I might throw up." Well, that's kind of legit. That's a legit fear. Dating. I'm so nervous on a date. I might just go puke. I may have to go make myself, not make myself throw up, but this is like people are driving a car and they're afraid they're going to vomit. They are having a very normal, casual conversation with someone over the water cooler at work, and then their whole head is they're afraid they're just going to like ejaculate or orgasm right in front of the person. These things have maybe never happened in their lives, but there's that fear that it will. Sometimes it actually did happen. The urinating, defecating maybe went back to when they were a kid, or something else. Maybe the vomiting, maybe they were very sick and they vomited and now they're very afraid. But most of the time, these are very just kind of out there obsessions where people don't even know where they got these thoughts. They're not their thoughts. They don't want to think this way. They don't want to do this, but it feels so real that they feel like they have to do something with it. I've had a few clients that have had these obsessive thoughts, and that's one of the things that they say is that they're talking to someone and they're trying to stay engaged in the conversation, but the whole time they're afraid that they're just going to like spontaneously vomit all over the place. And so half their brain is trying to deal with that fear, and the other half of their brain is trying to have the normal conversation. And then, of course, what happens is the person that they're talking to notices that there's something off, there's something wrong, and And then that just sort of fuels the fear of like, oh my God, they see what's coming, they know what I'm thinking, that sort of thing. So it's a very really kind of sad way to live. It's a very scary way to live. Usually because people can't explain these obsessions. They don't really want to talk about it. And of course, it's partly, it's embarrassing. I've had a client that was his big fear, was that he would spontaneously ejaculate while talking to someone. And that's not the sort of thing, how do you bring that up in conversation? I mean, I think he told his girlfriend, and that was really about it, because that particular one is just so embarrassing that no one even wants to talk about it. And so people stay stuck in with these obsessions. And then there's the compulsions. Compulsions are a feeling that you need to do a behavior. And a lot of times these go together, which is why we call it OCD, obsessive-compulsive behavior. They don't have to go together, but they usually do. But the compulsion is that if they don't do something, then bad stuff will follow, whatever it is. And a lot of times the people, when you talk to them, they can't even explain what the bad thing is. They just know it's really bad, it's really scary, and if they don't tap all surfaces 3 times, or if things aren't arranged into 3s or 4s or 7s or whatever it is, then bad stuff will happen. I had another client who I know is the same client. He with most fear of spontaneous ejaculation. I forget what the number was, but everything had to be divisible by a certain number. And he also had a very bad alcoholism, because he was drinking, because when he was drunk, that was the only times that these obsessions would go away. But his compulsions was everything had to be divisible by, we'll say 5, because the number changed, so it actually doesn't matter what the number was. And that's what happens with compulsions. Everything has to be divisible by 3. So you tap everything by 3. You jiggle the lock 3 times. You have to have 3 keys on your keyboard. If you eat something, it has to be in 3s. You only eat French fries in numbers of 3s. Why? Don't know. It's just something that their brain picked up. It decided that this is the thing we're going to focus on, because that will prevent the bad thing from happening. And then one day the brain will just change the number, and all of a sudden it's 4s. Or maybe it's 5s because it's odd. Who knows? OCD does not have any real rhyme or reason to it. And that's one of the reasons why it is so difficult for people to wrap their head around it, to understand it. Even the person who has it can't really understand it, but they will tell you it is deathly important that everything be divisible by 5s, because something bad will happen. And if it's not divisible by 5, they will obsess over it for the rest of the day. It will destroy their whole day after that, maybe even days afterwards, because that is something that they need to deal with, because the anxiety gets so ramped up because they didn't do the thing. Think of almost like obsessive-compulsive disorder, like superstitions, just dialed up to 11, because just like, if you don't sprinkle salt and throw it over your shoulder, well, the demons will come and get you, or whatever. You gotta rub your lucky's rabbit's foot before you get in the car or something. Walk around the airplane 5 times before you get in it. It's very much like a superstition. That's actually a very common OCD, is what we call harm OCD, where people are intensely afraid that they have hurt or will hurt someone. These are not violent people. In fact, they're just the opposite. They are terrified that they might hurt someone. I remember seeing an interview, this wasn't a client of mine, but it was an interview that I saw with a woman who had harm OCD, and she said it would take her an hour just to go to the grocery store that was like 15 minutes away, because she would constantly have to stop, get out, look around the vehicle, because she got convinced that she may have run someone over. And then, of course, her brain would convince her, oh, you hit someone, but you forgot. You didn't notice it. You were just so clueless. And so she'd have to stop. She'd have to get out and check the car and look all over and check to see if there was any blood. And, of course, then she'd have to check it again because, well, what if I missed something? I didn't see it the first time. And so I heard another story of a man who was not a pedophile, but was so afraid that he would spontaneously abuse a child that he moved out in the woods far, far away from anybody else. So he would have zero access to children because he was so afraid that if he just accidentally ran across a child, he might molest them. He was not a child molester. In fact, he was the opposite. Child molesters are out hunting down children, whereas this guy was desperately trying to stay away from children because he didn't want to accidentally hurt them. And that seems to be the thing. There's a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, and a lot of fear built into OCD. And so when I watch shows like Monk, where it's just this kind of joke about this guy who's super neat and likes to have everything completely tidy, well, it's kind of funny, but that's not OCD. Another extension of OCD is hoarding. Hoarders, and again, that's the funny thing. You think of hoarders of like having piles of garbage in their house, and then but OCD is represented in TVs. Monk with his pristine home and everything has to be spotless white or whatever. But hoarders in their own way is OCD. They are afraid that if they throw something out, then something bad will happen. And so they save everything, whatever else it is. They to the point that they may not even wash their dishes, but they don't want to throw out the dishes. So they will take the dirty dishes and put them in a garbage bag and then pile that up in the kitchen. And so they got a big pile of like literal just dirty dishes sitting in a garbage bag that they're not going to clean, but they'll just go out and buy new ones and save the dirty ones. People will save used toilet paper, used tampons, used food cartons. They will read a magazine once and set in a corner and ignore it for years, decades, whatever. There was a case, this is a very interesting one, where there were two brothers who were basically, a lot of people describe as maybe autistic, but they seem to have OCD tendencies. That every week, they would go to the comic book store and they would buy like one of each issue of the comics. And then they would read the comics, read them once, put it back in the paper bag it came in, and then put it in a closet. And they just sat there. And like decades later, those brothers died. Someone went through the home and found this gigantic pile of all these old comics that basically were just sitting unread, unused, pretty much in mint condition. And someone made, a small fortune off of selling all those old comics and that sort of thing. Hear about similar stories about people who save old movie posters or old movies in some cases, that sort of thing. But yeah, hoarders also have their own form of obsessive-compulsive disorder. And that's why it's really hard to clean out a hoarder's home, is because something bad will happen if they throw this out. And they can name everything. You can reach in to a garbage bag, pull something out, and they can tell you what it is, where they got it, and why they need to keep it. And so that's why taking care of hoarders is very difficult. And really the only time I know it really gets dealt with is when there's children involved or an elderly person. Because children, elderly people, and I guess disabled would be in the same category. But these are people who are protected classes at the federal level and usually at the state level. And so then the state can intervene. And when I was a CPS investigator, that was one of the things we had to do sometimes, is children living in the home with hoarders, and we had to remove the children because it was just unsafe, partly because there was actual broken glass or whatever else laying around, but also just unhealthy. It was just unsanitary. It's even unhealthy for kids at an emotional stage. So when writing about OCD, it can be a very interesting thing. I think, one, you have to be if you want to do an accurate description of OCD, you have to write about the inner monologue that is going on in their head at all times. What is it that they are obsessed with? And then that needs to come up a lot, all the time. It needs to be incessant. You can't mention it once or twice and then ignore it. You might as well just not even do it at that point. It needs to be something that comes up quite often, that even in a dialogue where two characters are talking and one of them has OCD, you need to have the little thought pop up, maybe in italics, of being their constant fear of what they're afraid of is going to happen. Or if you're going to do the compulsion side, pick a compulsion and then just stick with it. Have it come up quite all the time. Imagine a detective, like let's do Monk, and we do it more accurately, and Monk has to divide everything by fours. He would have to check the crime scene 4 times. He would have to write down everything 4 times, or he'd have to have 4 pencils on him at all times, or whatever that is. But it needs to be this sort of constant thing in the background if you're going to do it accurately. You can't just throw it out there and go, oh, he's got this compulsion who taps everything 3 times. Then you need to show it that he's tapping everything 3 times. It could be, I think the danger is it can be very annoying to the reader, but that's kind of the point, right? So if you do it right, then it gives the character a real depth and gives the reader a real insight into what having OCD can be like. If you do it wrong, it feels like you just sort of slapped it on there just for the hell of it. And if you do it, or if you do it wrong, then it'll just annoy the hell out of your reader, and they'll just quit reading after a few chapters. So I think it'd be very interesting to do with a short story. Maybe that's something I will do. But anyway, let me know what you think. If you have any other questions about mental illnesses or anxiety disorders or obsessive-compulsive disorder, it's having worked with a few clients with OCD, I can kind of say it's really a very kind of sad way to live, because these people are kind of trapped in their own fear bubble that they can't really escape, even though those of us on the outside will just say, well, just stop doing that. But their brain is telling them horrible things will happen if they don't do these things or worry about this stuff. And so it's a very, interesting and sad disease to kind of work with. And that's why I kind of get pissed off when I see it being represented as just, being a neat freak. There's nothing wrong with being a neat freak, but that's not OCD. OCD is its own animal. But anyway, let me know if you have any other ideas for mental health issues. I think the next video will be on PTSD, another form of anxiety disorder. Anyway, I will talk to you later. Bye.